It's a funny place to be, stuck in a seemingly mundane world with an inner knowing that the universe is so much more than our mortal minds can comprehend. Yet we all have the capacity to know peace and our oneness with the wholeness of life. And through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share this possibility. I'm Ryan Kurzak, and this is the Kriya Yoga Podcast. It was Monday, August 14th, when I first met my meditation teacher, my Kriya Yoga teacher, Eugene Davis. It was around 6:30 in the morning. Maybe it was 6 o'clock. During those days, the retreats at Center for Spiritual Awareness, the meditations began earlier than they do now. But I remember sitting in the third row back on the right side of the meditation hall and doing my best to be still and to meditate. Because at this point in time, I'd only been meditating 6 to 9 months at most, and I really wasn't that good at it. But as I was sitting there, I was a bit excited, and I don't know why. Even though I had an interest in religion and spirituality and philosophy, pretty much from the age of 12 on, religious experiences, spiritual experiences, were not necessarily something that were foremost in my mind, that I thought about, that I craved, that I wanted. However, as I sat there in this meditation hall, it was completely quiet, and there were other participants there. And around 6 o'clock, and I do think it was 6 o'clock now that I think back, the door opened in the back of the room, the door that leads to the cafeteria or dining hall portion of the meditation hall. And then it closed. And as I was staring forward in the dark, there was a little bit of light from the front of the building. And I saw a tall figure walk up the right side of the room, cross in front of all the chairs facing forward, step up to the altar where there was pictures of Indian saints, Indian gurus. And this man lit a stick of incense, and while the incense stick was still on fire, still burning a little bit, he waved it in front of the pictures of these gurus, and Jesus' picture was right in the middle at that point in time. And then he lit a candle, a little lotus flower, looked like a stained glass lotus flower candle holder, put the incense in its stand, and then went and sat down in this chair in the front of the room. And when I saw that, I was overcome by emotion. It was a combination of almost anxiety and a little bit of stress within the body, but also excitement and peace and relaxation, all rolled together. And then we began the meditation process. We began with a little bit of chanting, and then Mr. Davis encouraged us to meditate in a way that allowed our innate urge for clarity, our innate spiritual consciousness to come forth, meditate in a way such that that could happen. And it was a 30-minute meditation. And again, being new to meditation, I did my best. And after the meditation was over, we had a break where we would eat breakfast, and then I believe it was about 3 hours later, 3.5 hours later, we would meet to have a discussion where Mr. Davis would essentially have a lecture on Kriya Yoga, a lecture on his experiences. But after the meditation was over, I felt I should go introduce myself to Mr. Davis. And at that point in time, I had just given up eating meat. I had switched over to a vegetarian diet. I had done my best to start being healthier, just coming out of college in 2000. I was extremely skinny because I had lost a lot of weight after switching to an Ayurvedic program and, again, not eating meat or a whole bunch of other junk food. I used to have long hair in high school and college, and maybe about 6 months before I had shaved it all off, so I had spiky hair that wouldn't really stay down. And I was wearing some sort of, I'm sure, gem necklace because I was into gemstones at that point in time. I remember walking up to him and I went to shake his hand because I thought that's what I should do. He looks very appropriate in the sense he's not playing this role of guru in a robe. He just looks like a normal Ohio-born in the 1930s elderly man compared to me. I believe he was 69 at the time when I met him, and I was 21. Just turned 21. And he waved my hand away and just gave me a hug. And he's quite a bit taller than me, so it was slightly awkward having my face sort of smashed into his chest. But I accepted it, and I introduced myself, and he said, "I'm glad you're here." And then he walked away. And I spent the rest of that week meditating when I was supposed to at the 6 a.m. meditations. There was another meditation in the afternoon. I attended the lectures that Mr. Davis gave just before lunch. And then on August 17th, which was a Thursday evening, around 7 or 7:30, that was when the Kriya initiation service was held, which is essentially where Kriya Yoga practitioners learn the Kriya Yoga pranayama techniques that are mentioned in Autobiography of a Yogi, the three main techniques to have a complete Kriya Yoga meditation practice. And I remember being extremely uplifted during that service. I learned the techniques. There was a blessing that was included within that. And then afterwards, Mr. Davis, for several years from that point forward that I can recall, would always make a dessert. It'd be some sort of healthy version of a typical dessert. So if it was cheesecake, it would be something like quinoa cheesecake or something like that. Although I don't think that actually works, but you get the idea. And I remember eating that and just savoring it. And then everyone was talking in the dining hall. Everyone had this sort of sense of excitement and joy about them. I thought, well, I really should get away and go meditate. So I walked up to the Temple of All Faiths, which is, I think it's octagonal, little small structure, and it has stained glass windows of various religions. Each stained glass window represents a particular religion. Of course, it can't be all of them, but maybe at least 8. And I remember sitting on the floor, what I consider to be Japanese style, where my legs are folded underneath of me, and meditating and going through the processes that I had just learned. And the third process in the Kriya Yoga practice is called Jyoti Mudra. It's this practice that encourages seeing the inner light. And I brought my awareness up to my forehead, the frontal regions of the brain where the spiritual eye is said to exist. And at the end of this meditation session, I recall those of you who might remember the old tube TVs that when you turned them off, it's like the screen sort of collapsed upon itself and made like a beam of light across the screen. Well, it was as if my consciousness turned into that kind of beam of light, and instead of collapsing down like these old TVs do, it exploded upwards and downwards. And the sound in my ears, which I later attributed to the ability to hear what's called the Om vibration, just overwhelmed me like an ocean wave, and that's all I was aware of. And I don't know how long that persisted. I wasn't aware of time. I don't think it was very long, but I remember I couldn't sleep that night. And it was actually common for me every time I would visit CSA that sleep was difficult. I would easily get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and with nothing to do, I'd wander down to the meditation hall and meditate there. I remember Mr. Davis got up very early, and he would arrive at his office, the chalet, on the CSA grounds, the A-frame. And there were quite a few times that I was walking down the hill around 2, 3 a.m. From the men's house to go to the meditation hall that Mr. Davis was just pulling in. And he would wave and he'd say, gee, maybe you should sleep some more. I'd say, I can't. And then I would go ahead and move up to the meditation hall. But that happened often. So I couldn't sleep much that night. And I remember the next morning having a strong sense of presence, a strong sense of purpose, a strong sense of rightness. And it only confirmed what I knew from the very beginning when I first read Autobiography of a Yogi, and when I first sat in the meditation hall and saw Mr. Davis walk up to the front of the meditation hall and begin the meditation. There was just this sense of, this is important. This is extremely important. And earlier in that week, I think it was probably the first or second day, I had asked to meet with Mr. Davis. I said, would you talk with me? And I was nervous about it. And for many years, probably at least 3 to 4 years, he always made me nervous. There was always this sense of, he knows so much more, or he knows what I'm thinking. It's funny how the mind works. But I asked to speak with him, and he said, sure. He said, meet me down by the pond, and we'll chat. So we sat on the stone bench, and he sat pretty close to me. And I believe I met with him on Wednesday morning of that week. And one of the first things that came out of my mouth, I don't know why, because I'd barely been introduced to all this. I'd only been meditating for, like I mentioned, 6 to 9 months before that. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, so when can I learn to teach this stuff? And I remember he looked at me with a little bit of a half smile, maybe a smirk, and he rubbed my back and said, boy, you're intense, aren't you? He said, maybe in 5 years, and then he let it drop. And I thought that was interesting. So he just talked to me about my meditation practice. He asked me what I studied in school, what my plans were, if I was in a relationship, which I was. And that was it. It was very simple. But I do remember that pat on the back. And what was fascinating about that, for multiple years, 5, 6 years from that moment, every time he would see me, he would always kind of do this sort of circular motion on the middle of my upper back and between my shoulder blades. And the reason I found that interesting was because not having been very active in high school nor college, not really taking care of my body well, my back hurt a good bit from time to time. I don't know whether it was because I was on the computer too much or just wasn't active or not stretching. But he would always rub it. And you really wouldn't even notice it if you weren't paying attention. But I would recall that after that happened, for several weeks and months, I would not have that pain in my back. Until eventually, I hardly had the pain at all. It might have been due to the fact that I also played a lot of musical instruments and my posture wasn't perfect. But that always happened. I always had a sense of less pain and also greater clarity after those brief moments. And so this was my introduction to Kriya Yoga. And it's remained a central pillar of my life since I began, and I consider my beginning when I first read Autobiography of a Yogi. Throughout all the good times that I've experienced in my life, throughout all of the difficulties, it has remained a central pillar, a core, that I would turn back to. Well, I didn't even have to turn back to it because it was always there. Most of the time, the books that I read, I quit reading novels, I quit reading for enjoyment. The books that I read and still read to this day can be counted on my hand, 5 of them. One of them being the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, another being the Bhagavad Gita. I used to read Autobiography of a Yogi a bit more, but not so much these days. And there's a few other books since then that I've come to enjoy, spiritual classics. So my life was built around this. And it's been my great good fortune to, as Mr. Davis said on that first week that we had met, when I had asked him, when can I learn to teach this? He said, give it about 5 years. And sure enough, it was 5 years. It was June 30th, I believe, of 2005, that Mr. Davis ordained me as a minister of Center for Spiritual Awareness and authorized me to teach Kriya Yoga. And it wasn't very long after that, a month or two, I believe it was August, I gave my first lecture, my first talk at the Unity of Kanawha Valley Church in Charleston, West Virginia. And what was interesting about that was Mr. Davis was very much, he had a particular way he wanted his ministers to present themselves. Suit and tie, well-groomed. And at that point in time, I did not have a suit. I had a tie and, I could dress up, but I didn't have a suit. And I remember I told him about this talk I had to give, and he said, well, make sure you wear a suit and a tie. And I said, I don't have one. And my wife at the time, Melissa Baker, was there, and she said, well, we'll get him one. And I was thinking, suits are expensive. And so before I gave the talk, I actually went out and we purchased a suit, and I was still I was still feeling that it was quite expensive because most of my 20s, I did not make much money. But we lived within our means, and we lived well, but I would not say we were affluent by any stretch of the word. And then after I gave this talk, I did it on a donation basis, as Mr. Davis always does with Center for Spiritual Awareness, or as he did with Center for Spiritual Awareness. And the amount of donations that I received from that talk were the exact cost of that suit. So just a small little thing, but I found to be serendipitous, if that's the right word. And then I do remember driving back from that talk. And aside from that one experience I had mentioned after my first initiation process, I had experienced moments of peace and clarity while practicing Kriya Yoga and doing my best to live the yogic lifestyle, but nothing overwhelming. And what I found interesting was on my way back from that talk, I was driving from Charleston back to, I believe it was Anmore, West Virginia. I stopped to get gas about halfway, and that was one of probably the second or third most profound experience I had had. I got out to pump gas, and as soon as I grabbed the the gas pump and put it in the gas tank, I looked to the clouds to the left, and all of a sudden the mind just stopped, and all I was aware of was this expansiveness and the cloud within this huge sea of blue, and everything was peaceful and still. So it taught me at that moment not to necessarily go seeking for spiritual experiences, always in meditation, but to remain open to the possibility that a shift in viewpoint, one's clarity of awareness can dawn at any moment. And the meditation process, and for me particularly the Kriya Yoga meditation process, is a training, something that you do every day is training so that you are receptive and ready for that experience whenever and however it may occur. So I wanted to give a little background into how I was introduced to the Kriya Yoga processes with this episode 0 of the Kriya Yoga podcast. And from there, what we're going to do, my intention is to interview other Kriya Yoga practitioners, longtime Kriya Yoga practitioners, for their own insights, life experiences, so that we can all benefit from their inspiration. To have discussions on information related to Kriya Yoga, ways of living that help keep us in harmony with the forces of nature around us, such as exploring Ayurveda, and maybe touch upon astrology a little bit, although we'll keep that to a minimum. We'll also consider the lives of the Kriya Yoga teachers, explore their stories, and we'll explore various texts, such as the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, and we'll even touch upon the works of Ramana Maharshi, because I do find that the path of self-inquiry is a wonderful adjunct to the Kriya Yoga practices. We'll see how this all unfolds. It's a new day, a new era, and you have a new life now. All of us do, with every breath. So let's see what we can make of it in the light of this Kriya Yoga tradition.